Welcome to this Tech Talk session by Microsoft EMEA. Today we have time for your questions, so feel free to use the chat on the channel where you are watching this live stream and ask me everything you are interested in. You have questions in about Microsoft technologies. So you can ask about Windows Server licensing, Windows Server technologies, Azure Stack HCI, hybrid services, Windows Admin Center, whatever you want. So use the comment functionality, the chat functionality, the feedback functionality to send in your questions, to send in your comments. My name is Manfred Helber. I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in the category Cloud and Data Center, and I'm here for you for the next 60 minutes for your questions. Usually we have a small delay between the time when you enter a question till the question appears here in my control plane. So I will give you a few minutes. You can send in your first feedback if everything is working, if sound is fine, if the screen streaming is fine, the screen sharing is fine. And for sure, you can send in your questions exactly here. I will put this in, feel free to send in here your questions about Microsoft solutions. Okay, exactly where you will see this message. It's posted on the two YouTube channels where we are streaming. Feel free to send in here your questions about Microsoft solutions, about Microsoft technologies, about everything you are interested in. So it's your time. It's time for your questions. Last Tech Talk support hour, we had several questions about clustering. I remember these questions. We had questions about usage scenarios for virtualized client operating systems. And we have a first feedback from Ralph. He's watching the stream on YouTube. YouTube is fine, it works. So this is perfect. So you can watch on both YouTube channels, on my YouTube channel and on the YouTube channel from Sven Langenfeld. These are the two channels where we are streaming. So feel free to send in your questions. I will take time to talk a little bit about Matrix, where I receive questions in the last weeks, in the last days, very, very often. Yeah, we have a question. Let's pick this one first. Hi, how to realize replication without a domain? So I assume the question is about Hyper-V replica, so replicating virtual machines from one host to another host. So the replication can be configured in the Hyper-V manager, for example. So if you have a machine, you can, let's start here, another machine. Let's start an Hyper-V host here. Let's go to the settings. Yeah, this should be fine. Let's start this one here. And if you have an Hyper-V manager, you have the Hyper-V settings, and here you can configure the replication. And if you have an Active Directory domain, so if your hosts are joined to an Active Directory domain, you can use the Kerberos authentication here. If you are working without a domain, you have to use a certificate-based authentication. So in this scenario where you don't have a domain, you will need certificates on both hosts, and you can use the certificate-based authentication. Maybe I may ask you why you don't have a domain in the replication scenario, because my recommendation would be to establish a domain, to build a domain, to add the Hyper-V hosts to the Active Directory domain, and then use the Kerberos authentication. But from the technical perspective, it's absolutely fine to use the certificate-based authentication. So the answer to your specific question is you have to use certificates. My question is, maybe it could be an option to add the hosts you want to use for Hyper-V replica to a domain? So perfect question. Feel free to send in more of these questions about Hyper-V, about Windows Server, also previous version. It's not only about Windows Server 2022. And for sure, if I answer a question and the answer is not absolutely clear for you, you can ask again. So this is our. Then we have a question: is it possible to add a classic team from PowerShell? Maybe you can specify the question a little bit more. I assume it's about teaming of network interface cards. Or do you mean a team in Microsoft Teams? So is it a team for a class, or do you mean a classic team configuration? So maybe you can specify this if it's about Microsoft, what you exactly plan to do. Okay, so yes, feel free to send. Yeah, okay, it's about Microsoft Teams, and you want to add a team from PowerShell. I will check if I can find something about this. Microsoft Teams team via PowerShell. Let's have a look at this. Yes, there's a PowerShell reference for this. So when you go to docs.microsoft.com, I will add this at Microsoft Teams team via PowerShell. There's a PowerShell reference, and this can be used with a new team display name, and then we have different attributes. As you know, the docs.microsoft.com documentation, we have several examples. So for example, example 2, this example creates a team with a specific description and public visibility and so on. I assume this is what you were looking for. So PowerShell commandlet is new team. So then we have a question. We need to access the usual POP, SMTP, and EWS protocols through Graph API from modern authentication. Unfortunately, we cannot authenticate when multi-factor authentication is enabled, even when using an app password in the application. Are app passwords not supported with modern authentication? I'm not sure if this is a question of support. Let's see the app passwords modern authentication, what the reference says. Yeah, but there's I must admit I've not configured this, so I'm not sure about this actually. But there's also an I must check the question again. Modern authentication. I'm not absolutely sure about the specific scenario if this will work. SMTP was the exact question. So it should be absolutely supported, as I understand the docs article I found here. And I have also a solution in there about the usage or for POP, SMTP, and EWS, but I'm not sure. I've not configured it how the article describes it here, but I can add this article to the comments. So MFA with and modern authentication. There's a docs article about this, but as I mentioned, I must admit, I've not configured this as it described here. So I have to test if this really works. Maybe you can have a look at this. There was an addition to this question, or is there a way to suppress MFA for specific third-party apps which access Microsoft APIs? Maybe this would be possible to use the credential store in Azure to have or build a solution for this. But this is something I must test. So I'm not sure about this, if this will work. So I posted the docs article that seems to be the solution for this in the chat. And I will try to find out, but this is not possible within this hour, but I will try to find out if this is possible via the credential store in Azure. Yeah. Okay. So it was exactly about POP, SMTP, and EWS protocol through Graph API for modern authentication. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I will check this afterwards. And maybe the article I posted is helpful. So then we have a question. Is it possible to wake up a virtual machine via Wake on LAN? I assume not. I've never seen a solution about this, but for sure you can trigger a virtual machine. So when the idea is, can I start a virtual machine in case of a specific event or in sending a specific package? So there's not an OS integrated solution for this, but for sure you can use PowerShell from the host to trigger the start of a virtual machine. And so maybe this could be a solution that you listen on the host for the package you receive for the wake on LAN action, and then you trigger the start of the virtual machine for the virtual machine itself. But why would you shut down the virtual machine? I'm not completely clear about the scenario. So I understand wake on LAN for the physical host, but why is the virtual machine offline and it's a wake on LAN action? If yes, my my recommendation is to trigger it via the host, but maybe you can explain me the scenario a little bit more. Maybe there's another better solution. Okay. Mm. So now we have an addition to the question about class teams. Okay. So we have an additional question. It was not about classic teams. It was about class teams in Teams education. Um, and there is an okay. It seems this could be the solution. Answer to class teams in Teams Edu. So there's a tech community article at Microsoft that describes how how the process via PowerShell for creating class teams works. This was a misunderstanding from my side. I was thinking about traditional teams. You were asking about Teams education. Maybe you can have a look at this tech community link. Maybe this is helpful. Okay, great questions today. Feel free to add more questions. Feel free to add questions to your questions. Here, for example, this question about Teams was good that you wrote again because I didn't get it right when you started with the question, because we have different technologies at Microsoft where the word team and teams is used. Yeah. Okay. So as I mentioned, there's a short delay. This is the reason why I start talking a little bit about these topics. Okay, the attendee that asked about modern authentication and app passwords says in the article I posted, and I didn't get this, is a note box that describes clearly that modern authentication with app passwords is not working. So I didn't get this note box, but then we could clarify it via this article here. Yes, I can show this for everybody. Here is the note: app passwords don't work with policies in modern authentication. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, yeah, feel free to send in more questions. If there's too much time till the next question appears, I have some topics I will take where I had several questions in the last days or weeks. But first, I will give you some time to send in your next questions. And I assume you can see this when you entered your question till you see your question on the screen and get the response. There's some time between, because yes, we are streaming live, but we have some buffering technologies to ensure that the stream keeps up and running. So usually up to 30 seconds we have here delay from what I'm saying and what I'm seeing to what you are hearing and what you are seeing. Okay. So I will use a few minutes to talk about Office operating system support, because I received so many questions about this in the last weeks, in the last month, because we have different platforms, we have different Office versions, and we are talking here about Office subscriptions and Office licenses that allow the usage on in remote desktop services scenarios from the licensing perspective. And the difficult thing at this OS support matrix is that we have the licensing on the one side, and we have the technical requirements and things on the other hand. So when we look for the licensing, we have the situation Office LTSC, the Office Long-Term Servicing Channel version of Office 2021 allows us to use this Office on an RDS host, on a terminal server, in a session virtualization scenario. This Office is not licensed for the RDS host, for the Remote Desktop Services session host. This Office is licensed for the client that will access this Remote Desktop Services session host. So there are no licenses of Office or for Office for the Remote Desktop Services session host itself. When we use Office as a perpetual license, Office 2021, it's the same for 2019, 2016, 2013. We always have to license the client from which we want to access the RDS host. And this client, when this client is licensed with an eligible volume license of Office, and Office LTSC 2021 is such a license, then we are allowed to use Office on the target RDS host. I think this is clear. If you didn't know it, I hope this explanation helped you to understand the licensing perspective. When we look at Microsoft 365, then we have also Office included. In Microsoft 365, we have the Office 365 apps. This was the previous naming. In the last year, the naming changed from Office 365 apps to Microsoft 365 apps. The Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise include the usage right to be installed or used on an RDS host. Microsoft 365 is not licensed per device, but per user. So myself, I have a Microsoft 365 app for enterprise license, or Microsoft 365 E3 or E5 or something like this. Then I can use the Office on my devices and also on an RDS host. We don't need any additional licenses for the RDS host. What we are using here regarding the usage terms is the SCA, the Shared Computer Activation usage rights. Shared Computer Activation is included in the Microsoft 365 enterprise apps and in Microsoft 365 Business Premium. From the business lineup, the Business Premium Edition is the version that includes the usage rights for shared computer activation, and so we can use this in shared computer activation scenarios like the installation on RDS hosts. So regarding the licensing, it's clear. So if I'm using Microsoft 365 Business Standard, I don't have the shared computer activation included. If I'm using Office 2021 Home and Business, I don't have the usage rights for Remote Desktop Services session hosts because it's not a volume license. So regarding the licensing is clear and nothing changed here. Yes, the situation that we have the usage right for shared computer activation in Microsoft 365 Business Premium was added, I would say, 2 years ago. It was not there from the initial availability of this product, but Microsoft didn't remove here anything. So we still have the situation, the enterprise apps of Microsoft 365 and also Microsoft 365 Business Premium includes the usage rights for shared computer activation. And the Office LTSC, what is a volume license, also includes the usage rights on RDS hosts. So it depends on our preference. Do we prefer a subscription than Microsoft 365 apps, or do we prefer a perpetual license than maybe Office LTSC? Do we prefer usage-based licensing than Microsoft 365? Do we prefer a device-based licensing than Office LTC, and so on. Microsoft 365 apps don't have any end date for the support of the apps, because the Microsoft 365 apps, it's a subscription. We receive updates, new versions every month. The Office LTSC 2021 is end of support in October 2026. This is new. In the past, Office had 10 years of support. Now in Office 2021, it's an LTSC for long-term servicing channel, but the LTSC, so the complete servicing channel, is maximum 5 years. Okay. So this is the licensing perspective and the servicing channel. So, but we have also to care about the OS support. So both Office editions are supported on Windows 11. And we can see here no end date for Microsoft 365 apps. There's a small footnote, but as long we have a support for Windows 11, we also have the support for Microsoft 365 apps there. Both platforms are developed at the same servicing level and servicing lifecycle. For Office, for sure, when the Office support ends, the Office support ends also on Windows 11. When we look at Windows 10, there we have an additional semi-annual channel remark. In Windows 10, we had the semi-annual channel versions and the long-term servicing channel versions. And semi-annual channel meant we had a new version every 6 months. In Windows 11, we have a new version every 12 months. And in the Pro version, we have 2 years, so 24-month time till we install this new version. So because the OS support for Windows 10 semi-annual channel ends in October 2025, for both, for the Microsoft 365 apps and for the Office LTSC, the support ends on this Windows 10 platform in October 2025. Because when the OS support ends and the application support still resists, we cannot have support on this combination. We have to migrate to a new OS. So when we switch to Windows 11, we have additional support for Office LTSC, 1 additional year. For Microsoft 365 apps, we don't have a support end date here. So this is the installation on the local client. Now, important is to understand what happens on the server. In Windows Server 2019, we have a support for the server or OS till January 2029. So from today, it's more than 6 years. It's 6.5 years, something like this. In October 2026, the support for Office LTSC ends on Windows Server 2019. Why 3 years earlier? Yes, it's because the support of Office 2021 LTSC ends there. It's the same on Windows Server 2022, because Windows Server 2022 end of support is in October 2031, but the Office LTSC 2021 application support ends in October 2026. And so it's not possible to extend this support here via or across this time, October 2026 here. So if you migrate to a newer Office version that maybe will published in a later point of time, then you will maybe have additional support here. So now it's important to understand what you can see in the column about the Windows Server and the Microsoft 365 apps. Because on Windows Server 2019, we have a support for the Microsoft 365 apps till October 2025. This is fine. Seen from today, it's more than 3 years, 3 years and 3 months, like something like this. But here we can see we don't have a support for Microsoft 365 apps on Windows Server 2022. We still have the usage rights in the Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise on Windows Server. Because we have the shared computer activation there, we can use it in RDS scenarios, in remote desktop session host scenarios, but we don't have the support from the technical perspective on Windows Server 2022. This means if you are building a terminal server and a remote desktop services session host with Windows Server 2022, and you want to install the Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise or out of Microsoft 365 Business Premium, then from the licensing perspective, everything is fine. But from the technical perspective, this combination is not supported. Why is this the situation? Microsoft already planned to discontinue the support for the 365 apps when Windows Server 2019 was launched. When Windows Server 2019 was launched in October or in end of 2018, there was no support for the Office 365 apps there. But Microsoft added this support because there was so much request from the market. But Microsoft also explained why there was no Office 365 or Microsoft 365 apps from the beginning when the product started, because Windows Server is a long-term servicing channel product. This means 10 years support for a specific version. Some perpetual license. The idea is you have a specific version and you can use it as long as you want. You have support for 10 years. The 365 apps, they have a modern life cycle. When we look at the Office component in the 365 apps, it's renewed, it's updated, it's extended every month. We see new features every month here. And when you think a little about it, I think it's clear that this is difficult to bring together. Because if you need any changes on the OS platform to enable new features in the application, you will need to wait more than 10 years to be able to do this, to be able to implement the changes, because you have some support agreements you gave your customers. And Microsoft does not say, Microsoft 365 apps will not work on Windows Server 2022. Microsoft says it's not supported. So if there is a change, we will need tomorrow in the apps, Microsoft will implement the change, even if this change is responsible that from this point of time, the apps will not run any longer on Windows Server 2022. I received several feedback about this situation where our partners and customers said, I tried this. Microsoft 365 apps work on Windows Server 2022 in remote desktop services session host scenarios. If you are able to configure this and bring this to work, it's your decision and it's fine, but you don't have a support for it. So if anything changes tomorrow in the Microsoft 365 apps, that will result in a non-working configuration. You will not receive any support. You will not receive any update from Microsoft. So what's the solution if you have an RDS scenario? Solution one is to decide for the Microsoft 365 apps and make a downgrade to Windows Server 2019 or to Windows Server 2016, because both are supported till October 2025. And here you can see how clear Microsoft support agreements are, because Microsoft announced the support for these two platforms till exactly this date. And this is where Microsoft still works on and says, okay, for this OS platform and for this OS platform, you will receive the support till the end of the initial announcement. We don't have it here. So my recommendation would not to use Windows Server 2022 in combination with the Microsoft 365 app, even if it might be working in your configuration. The solution 2 is to decide for Office LTSC 2021, because here you can see for this option 2, you can use the Windows Server 2022 as an host OS platform, or you can use the Windows Server 2019 as an host OS platform. Both options are possible. The recommendation when you look to the future is to look at alternate services like, for example, Windows 365 or Azure Virtual Desktop, because with Azure Virtual Desktop, you can also decide to use Windows Server 2022 or Windows Server 2019 or Windows Server 2016 or Windows Server 2012 or 2012 R2 as an RDS host. So it's the same situation then regarding the Office support. But with Azure Virtual Desktop, you can also use Windows 11 or Windows 10. And here you can see when you look at Windows 11, you have this great information that we have no end date that is known today. So support, as long as we have support for Windows 11 and Office or Microsoft 365 apps. And the Windows 11 is available in AVD as a multi-user configuration. When we use Azure Virtual Desktop, we can use Windows 11 multi-user or multi-session. This means we have a Windows 11 Enterprise, and it's also available for Windows 10 Enterprise, where we can use several simultaneous user sessions to provide user session virtualization for our users. So this is not available on premises. On premises, regarding the licensing perspective, you are not allowed to run several parallel remote desktop sessions on a Windows client. You can do this on Windows Server, but you are not allowed regarding the licensing to do this on a Windows client, even not if you are using a third-party tool there. It's only available in Azure Virtual Desktop. There we have the multi-session or multi-user environment. This can be used to use Windows Client OS as an RDS host. And the great thing about Azure Virtual Desktop is that it's not only available in Azure, it's also available in Azure Stack HCI. So we can bring it to on-premises. Something to clarify here, it's not available today, it's in preview today, so you can test it. It works great on premises on Azure Stack HCI. It's released in Azure, so there you can use it in production on Azure Stack HCI. It's a preview version. And the great thing about Azure Stack HCI is that 3 weeks ago, Microsoft announced that Azure Stack HCI will also be available or is available in a single node configuration. So this means you can bring Azure Virtual Desktop to on-premises on a single server via the Azure Stack HCI single server configuration. Okay, so this is the complete story about Office and OS support. To add something here, when you look at the Windows long-term servicing channel versions, these versions here are not recommended for the traditional user desk or user workplace. On these LTSC versions, long-term servicing channel versions of Windows 10, we also have no support for the Microsoft 365 apps here because, as I explained, it doesn't fit if we have an OS that's supported for 10 years and an application that's modernized every month. Okay, hopefully this explanation helped to answer all the questions about Office OS support. If not, feel free to add your individual questions about this topic. And when you are thinking about Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI, then my recommendation is to join next Monday, because on June 27th on 12 p.m. Central Eastern Time, so it's at 12 o'clock German time, there we have a session about Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI, including live demos. So there you will see how Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI works, what are the central configuration steps, and so on. So we had this question about modern authentication. Do you got experts on hand regarding modern authentication migration, also regarding programmatic API implementation? We are struggling a little bit about this. I don't have a contact or person I can recommend for exactly this topic, but I can try to find out if there is any MVP colleague, for example, that's specialized on this topic. Okay, so feel free to send in more questions about this Office support matrix, about remote desktop services, about licensing, about Hyper-V. We had the question about Hyper-V replica, about Teams, whatever you are interested in. We have about 15 minutes left, so feel free to send in more questions. When your question is, how do we continue with the tech talks? We have a short summer break in July. So depending on which region where you are from, hopefully this fits. So I'm based in Germany. So here in July, we usually have the situation that we have holiday times in different regions of Germany and so on. So in July, we have a short summer break for the Tech Talks, and they will continue after the summer break with new interesting topics. So we will have again the Tech Talks in both categories, the content Tech Talks once a week with interesting highlights, and the Q&A we have here that is here for your questions. Okay, feel free to add more questions into the chat here. We had a session about licensing a few weeks ago where I used the Tech Talks. There were not so many questions from the attendees. And we used the questions, the time to talk a little bit about licensing. And I mentioned that we have a great advantage with the extended security updates on Azure Stack HCI, because I explained to you when you migrate your workload to Microsoft Azure, so virtual machines, SQL Server installations, and so on, you will receive additional support in Azure because we have 3 years extended security updates after the end of support in Azure. So this means when you look at Windows Server 2008, this product is already end of support on premises. In Azure, it's supported till January 2023. And here I have to add a special thing, because for Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2, Microsoft added another year of support when we bring this workload to Azure or Azure Stack HCI. And this is the great thing when you are thinking about how to get extended security updates for your environment, then it could be an interesting option to migrate to Azure Stack HCI. And in the past, This was always a question of building a cluster because Azure Stack HCI required minimum 2 hosts. We had always a cluster configuration. And new in since 3 weeks, it was announced at Microsoft Build Conference, is that we have full support for building single node Azure Stack HCI clusters. This means you can build a Azure Stack HCI cluster with one physical host. So for sure, we cannot survive any outage of this host, but we can survive disk failures and so on. And this single host can provide all the Azure Stack HCI advantages we know from the larger scalability, so from the 2, 3, 4, 5 node clusters, including extended security updates, including Azure Virtual Desktop, and so on. Everything is here included and possible. So thanks for this feedback. The attendee that asked for adding a class team from PowerShell already tested my solution. I posted in the chat and says, perfect, it's working. So thank you for this feedback. This makes me happy that I can see that the possible solution I posted is working. Hopefully it's fine for you. We cannot live demo or test everything in this Q&A hour, but thanks for the feedback. Perfect. Okay, Azure Stack HCI. So think about this single node configurations. Okay, I'm here a few more minutes for your questions about Windows Server, Azure Stack HCI, Windows Admin Center, licensing, downgrade, upgrade, hybrid services, whatever you are interested in. If your questions were already answered, I say thank you for your time, and hopefully we will see us on Monday, next Monday at 12 p.m. Central Eastern Time, so 1 hour earlier than the TechTalk support hour started. So there we will talk about Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI, and I can promise you it's a very interesting topic. If you are looking for the previous Tech Talks, maybe you will say, okay, there's something about Windows Server end of support. I missed this. Or about Azure Stack HCI, I missed this. All the Tech Talks are recorded and published on youtube.com/Manfred Helber and on youtube.com/Sven Langenfeld. So these are the 2 YouTube channels where we are live streaming, and you're watching there live. Actually, you have access to the live stream. You can you have time shift functionality to go back or move forward. And as soon as the live stream has finished, so if there are no more questions from your side, and I click on stop live stream, then it will be available on demand on YouTube. So you can access the content also from the previous sessions. And as I mentioned, we will also have the Tech Talks in the next month, but not in July, where we have a short summer break. Okay, let's look at the comments. If there are any more comments or questions, if you have specific questions about Microsoft, sorry, not question, specific topics you want to see in one of the Tech Talks in the future, feel free to also bring them to the chat. I will take this wishes from you and bring them, or try to bring them, to one of the next Tech Talks or next Tech Talk support hours. So feel free to use the last minutes to publish some additional questions, to bring up your topics you are interested in for future Tech Talk sessions, and your feedback about the session today, about the Tech Talks. Maybe you have attended before, and I'm looking forward to have you in the Tech Talk next Monday about Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI. So I will stay online because I mentioned the delay we have between the live streaming and your site when it appears on your screen, on your machine. And so I will give you some time to send in some more questions and comments. So I also brought this to the chat. So if you're only watching the chat, you also have the information here. So feel free to bring up your last questions, to bring up your wishes. And from my side, I will send you a thank you very much. Thank you for your great questions. We really had great questions today and great feedback today. So thank you for your time. Looking forward to see you on Monday. And for sure on Monday in the Tech Talk live stream, we also have time for your questions, but there we try usually to have the questions content related. So there we will try to focus on Azure Stack HCI, Azure Virtual Desktop, regarding what I'm presenting and regarding the questions you will provide there. Okay, as I can see, actually no more questions in the chat. So I'm saying again, thank you for your time. Thank you for attending the session and see you Monday at 12 p.m. Central Eastern Time. Bye.